This is dogmatic theology. He's a Thomist. He was the bishop of Santiago de Cuba, I think. Yes. Talks about the Molinists here. He doesn't like the Molinists. Nobody, well, Jesuits like the Molinists, but nobody else does. See, dogma catholicum est. The Catholic dogma is that God certainly knows all things, the future contingentia, even those things are based on free will. So that's a Catholic dogma. You see, gives that to it. Various other qualifications. Anyway, so you'll see that one place he says sententia communior. That means the comparative in Latin can mean a strict comparative, more common. It can also mean very common. In other words, quite common. And commonissime could be either the absolute, the most common, or very, very common. So that's something to know about Latin. It doesn't mean necessarily the absolute. Like the King of France was the Rex Christianissimus, the most Christian king. And it really means a very Christian king. It doesn't mean the most Christian king of all the Christian kings. The Spanish king was His Catholic Majesty. That's right. Yes. So the French had to, of course, imitate that. So he was the Rex Christianissimus. So anyway, just trying to see some of these. So you'll see those qualifications, and you might see some variation among theologians as to some of them. You know how they regard some of them. All right. Let's see, did we finish that? Okay, now we're on page 180. 4524. Into what error does he fall who asserts that the church, in making censures which are inferior to the note of heresy, is not immune from error? So the question is, if the church doesn't say it's heresy, could the church be wrong about saying it's erroneous? That's the question. Response: it is agreed among all Catholic doctors that the dogmatic and infallible judgments extend to proposing truths which are connected with those things which are immediately revealed, and to the condemning of errors which are beneath heresy. Right? So that everybody says that. Indeed, this teaching of the doctors is the truth with which the theologians also agree, so that they dispute among themselves, says Herter, whether the opposite opinion is heretical or erroneous, or at least rash. Banyas, however, says it is an error or proximate to error to assert that the church can err in censures of this type. In other words, it's all part of the church's mission to not only propose the faith, but also to protect the faith from error. That would be the reasoning for that. So it's not as if you can just brush aside something if the church doesn't say it's heretical. But on the other hand, it would not be heresy to assert the erroneous opinion. You see, it would be erroneous, not heretical. So there's all sorts of grades. but error leads to heresy. But error is not heresy. I'm trying to think of something that's an error. I can't think of something right now, but you'll see that, something is given. The error is pretty bad, but it's not heresy. All right. In consequence, the doctrinal judgments of the church bind the consciences and require the internal assent of the mind. This is confirmed by the Council of Constance, namely from the mandate of Martin V concerning those suspected of the errors of Wycliffe and Huss. Likewise, let the especially learned person be asked whether he believes that the decision of the Sacred Council of Constance passed concerning 45 articles of John Wycliffe and the 30 of John Huss described above would be true and Catholic, namely, that the above-mentioned 45 articles of John Wycliffe and the 30 of John Huss are not Catholic, but some of them are notedly heretical, some erroneous, others audacious and seditious, others offensive to pious ears. So again, there's a gradation. Likewise, in the schema of the dogmatic constitution concerning the Catholic faith of the Vatican Council, there is this canon: if anyone should say that it is licit to hold or to hand over opinions condemned by the Church, provided that they are not condemned as heretical, let him be anathema. The canon, however, was omitted. You see, they never passed the schema on the Ecclesia in 1870 because of Garibaldi. They had to break up the council, and that was the next thing to be done, and it's really a shame because the schema is very, very good. I have the schema, I can show it to you. But the in general, it is at least erroneous, if not heretical, to say that we only have to assent to things that are dogmatically defined, and that is typical of SSPX. And well, it's not infallible, so we don't have to believe it. Pius IX wrote to the where is it? Vatican Council. It's in actually the supplement. Supplement here. Concerning that very thing, because they were saying there was a group of theologians in Munich. They were all modernists, early modernists. The modernism really didn't exist at that time as such, but they were early modernists. They became old Catholics later. Saying, I don't have the supplement here. I should. I don't. Well, let's see. He said it to the yeah, this is it. I have the margin UOM. Yeah, the conventions of the theologians in Germany. While in truth we laud these men with due praise because they profess the truth which necessarily, this is Pius IX, necessarily arises from their obligation to the Catholic faith, we wish to persuade ourselves that they did not wish to confine the obligation by which Catholic teachers and writers are absolutely bound only to those decrees which are set forth by the infallible judgment of the Church as dogmas of faith to be believed by all. So, as he's criticizing this idea that the only thing we have to believe is the big infallible dogmas. And we persuade ourselves also that they did not wish, you see how he's saying this, because they did, but he's trying to be nice, to declare that perfect adhesion to revealed truths which they recognized as absolutely necessary to attain true progress in the sciences and to refute errors, could be obtained if faith and obedience were given only to the dogmas expressly defined by the Church. For even if it were a matter concerning that subjection which is to be manifested by an act of divine faith, nevertheless, it would not have to be limited to those to those matters which have been defined by express decrees of the ecumenical councils or of the Roman pontiffs and of this see, but would have to be extended also to those matters which are handed down as divinely revealed by the ordinary teaching power of the whole Church, spread throughout the world, and therefore by universal and common consent are held by Catholic theologians to belong to faith. See? So again, it's just like in law, the common consent of lawyers concerning a certain law is taken as an index of what the law means, and that's also true if you have a common consent of approved Catholic theologians saying something is de fide or pertains to faith. That would be if you read Merkelbach, very often he says this is of faith according to the common preaching of the Church. See, as I said, the moral theology is very, very, very little is defined in moral theology. It's all common teaching. See, so that is important to understand, because that's a fallacy today. Well, it's not infallible. We don't have to. It's contrary to teaching of the Church. So where are we? Okay. So question 3 we have skipped. Question 11, the power of the Church. The power of the Church is twofold, namely the power of orders, which is also called sacramental, and the power of jurisdiction. Two different powers, each with its own object. Phillips, Cardinal Francelin, and others also list a third type of power, which they call magisterium. The more accurate position seems to be of those who retain the division into the twofold power and refer magisterium to the power of jurisdiction. That is, there is a law of belief. You have to believe this is a law. See, so that would be the reasoning of it. Here we are speaking about the power of jurisdiction, which is called, in a certain stricter meaning, the power of government, regimenis. This power of government is contained in the complete legislative, judicial, and coercive power. Those are the three powers. So you see the three powers divided according to Montesquieu. In the United States government, you have the judicial, the legislative, which is the Congress, the judicial, which is the Supreme Court, and the coercive, which is the executive power, that's the president. All governments have that power, but see, Montesquieu said you should divide them up and then they can fight among each other. So that's why we have the crazy government we have. All right, so, and each one fighting about whether they have the power or not. But concerning the coercive power, since it is rejected outright by some, and even with regard to spiritual punishments, and is rejected by others only with regard to the infliction of temporal punishments, there will be a twofold article concerning this. Therefore, four things are here in question. So first, whether Christ gave the church a legislative power, a judicial power, a coercive power, and whether the coercive power of the church extends to temporal punishments. Article 1, whether Christ gave to the church a legislative power. The definition of the legislative power: it is defined the power of making orders for the common good which oblige in conscience. See, orders or laws It is said to make orders for the common good, since law is properly so called, a certain order of reason for the common good, promulgated by him who is in charge of the community. See, so it's an ordinatio rationis. That's St. Thomas. It's an ordinatio rationis, so it has to be in accord with reason. So, for example, the Congress cannot order you to walk around with a paper bag over your head, because that would be contrary to reason, obviously. So, or to crawl around on all fours all the time. You can't walk anymore. You have to crawl. See, that would be contrary to reason. So it has to be in accordance with reason to be a law. All right. So for the common good, you see, the object of law is the common good. The object of authority is to make laws. See, authority is a faculty, and it is specified. That means that the essence of authority is the ability or faculty to make laws. And in turn, the object of law is the common good. See, so you have authority, which is defined as facultas legis ferendi, the power of making laws, or faculty, facultas. Remember, every faculty is specified by its object. That means it receives its essence from its object. All right. So that's, and so law is ordinatio rationis ad bonum commune, for the common good. So the bonum commune is the object of law. See, so bonum commune. So authority, therefore, is for the common good by way of law. And that's the argument with regard to the accepto of a pope when he's elected. He is implicitly accepting to protect the common good of the church. If he intends an end which is not the common good, then he cannot validly accept. That's the thesis. So, but that's, if I'm pointing that out because this is the definition. And that's why the president has to take an oath to the Constitution. That's the common good, it's the common law, and to uphold the Constitution. If he refused to do that, he would not be the president. And I think I told you there was a glitch with Obama. He didn't recite it right. And the Chief Justice had to go to the White House the next day to have him do it again. Yeah, I remember. Have to get it right. So it's a very important thing. I mean, the idea of authority not ordered to the common good is just insane and crazy. That I'm going to overthrow, I'm going to kill all the citizens. That's not authority. So power. So finally, the definition involves no less. Yes, every law induces a certain obligation and conscience, even civil laws. Civil laws obliging conscience, assuming that they are legitimate. But ecclesiastical laws as well. Finally, the definition involves no less than the thesis an obliging, permitting, and irritating law. So those are the different kinds of laws. Power in this whole question is understood concerning external and contentious power, not only a voluntary power or a power of the internal forum. See, so it's something by nature external. Legislative power is certainly extended to precepts, orders. A precept, however, involves an application of the law to do those things which are ruled by law. See, so that's a command. A precept is a command. They differ from the law in this, that by its nature it is transitory and it does not seem to be able to be legislated for the whole community. So, for example, recognize and resist would work if the Pope said to you, let's say St. Pius X said to you, I want you to go out and rob a bank for me. You could say, no, Your Holiness, I resist you. You see, because that's a precept. It's a particular command to a particular person, and he would still be the Pope, even though he's telling you to do something wrong. See? But when it regards the entire community, meaning the whole church, then you get into the church's assistance by the Holy Ghost. And then either you have to say that if you admit that these things are contrary to piety, contrary to faith, all the things that are being said and done, because there's a heteropraxis too, then, and they're universally promulgated, then you have to say the church has defected, which is against the faith. Or that these people promulgating them have defected, which is not against the faith, because there's nothing of faith that they necessarily are popes. That's the way it works. So it has nothing to do with his personal heresy. I shouldn't say nothing to do. That is another argument. But it really, in a way, doesn't apply, because that's not the central problem. The central problem is that you're being forced to accept some transformed Catholic religion, so to speak, that has never been done in the history of the church, that a council would come along and turn over everything. You are obliged, so to speak, to accept that, and it's on a universal level. It's not to a particular diocese or anything like that. It's universal level. Then you're involving the assistance of the Holy Ghost of the Catholic Church and its indefectibility. That's the central problem. It's not that he could be or is or might be a heretic. I mean, there's a whole bunch of rules that apply to that. I do think, in my opinion, that yes, public heresy would disqualify him from the papacy, but not everybody agrees with that. Cajetan and John of St. Thomas, they say he still needs to be declared as a heretic. But Bellarmine says, and those who follow Bellarmine say, no, public heresy would do it. Just as public heresy, as we saw, as public profession of heresy, puts you outside of the church automatically. De facto, you're outside of the church. So I would say de facto that would apply to him too. I mean, if he's de facto outside of the church, then yes, then then he would have he could not rule the church, obviously. But the de jure is still needed. And see, and that's the problem. Is there's no way to come up with a de jure outside the church. So everyone get that? You got it? It's important to make those distinctions. So, the object and subject of the legislative ecclesiastical power. The object of this power is not the truths of faith or morals to be defined. This is legislative. For it pertains to the magisterium to declare the doctrine of faith and morals. So that's really okay. But whatever is in discipline and in exterior matters, with the exception of the faith and the substance of the sacraments, is conducive to the worship of God and for the attainment and protection of salvation of souls. All of this, within the limits of the ecclesiastical society, can be the object of laws to be legislated by the church. All right. This seems to contradict what he's saying up here, because he seems to be following Francelin, whom he criticized in his little introduction. But he say up here he's saying legislative mysterium, and the more accurate position seems to be those who retained the division into twofold power, refer magisterium to the power of jurisdiction. But whatever, we'll see. So we're talking about lawmaking, canon law, right? And since the church has been instituted proximately by Christ for the purpose of procuring future happiness, this celestial good is considered to be the ratio formalis under which human acts are directed by ecclesiastical laws. So that means what the ratio formalis would be, what makes the law to be the law, and that is the celestial good, the attainment of eternal salvation. That's the purpose of all the church's laws and direct object of the laws. So the most noble power is referred to the legislative power, which is said to be dispensatory with regard to sacred things. Concerning this, the fathers at Trent declare that this power has ever been in the church, that in the dispensation of the sacraments, their substance being untouched, it may ordain or change what things soever it may judge most expedient for the profit of those who receive, or for the veneration of the said sacraments, according to the difference of circumstances, times, and places. So it means that, dispensatory means that the church is ultimately the authority comes from God. The church is dispensing the authority of God in these laws. It's really all it means. So so the church is able to change the rights. You see, so we're not in a modern situation, we're not denying to the church the right to change the rights. It's not bound by any kind of law that it could not change. It's just that obviously the rights have to reflect the dogmas that they represent. See, so that's the key. It's not that a pope cannot, for example, Pius V changed certain things in the Mass. He added the last Gospel. He added the prayers at the foot of the altar. The offertory prayers were added during the Middle Ages. They came from the Gallican liturgy, and Gallican doesn't mean Gallicanism, it means the French that were using. The offertory prayers were not originally part of the Roman Rite. So there have been additions and changes. Clement VIII changed the epistles and gospels from the old Italic version to the Vulgate. The Vulgate had just been published by Sixtus V. He was the successor of Sixtus V, late 1500s, and he was 1600, I think, when he came in, Clement VIII. And so he changed all of the texts were in originally the Old Italic, which was considered to be an imperfect translation, and now they're in the Vulgate. See, so there have been changes. It's the Pope is the head of the church. He can alter things, but not against their substance. You see, that came into effect with Pius XII when he made he excluded the Correctio Instrumentorum in the rite of ordination from the matter. See, it was always disputed what is the matter of ordination, holy orders, and I believe it was the Council of Florence that said that in the Latin Rite, the Correctio Instrumentorum is part of the matter. And he changed that. But he said that this is because, you see, there's only two sacraments where Christ established the form, and that is baptism and Holy Eucharist. And the other rites are up to the church. In other words, that how you would ordain, how you would confirm, and it is assumed that Christ gave the general ideas of these things when it says in St. Luke that he spoke to them about the kingdom of God on earth, which means after his resurrection. That was 40 days after his resurrection. But the church has control over those things. See, so that's why you see, for example, a different form of confirmation in the Eastern rites than in the Western rites. See, and for various reasons. That's why Mysterium Fidei is not in the Eastern rite of the form of the Holy Eucharist, but it is in the Western rite, and they could be there for all sorts of reasons, or not be there for all sorts of reasons. So Pius XII said that he pointed that out. He said the Church has control over these things, and it was the Porexio Instrumentorum was necessary for validity up to a certain point, and he actually said of midnight. Whereas, so, and then it changed that it is no longer necessary. So he did not contradict Florence. He's just saying that Florence was saying something that over which the Church has control. So I am saying something over which the Church has control, and he eliminated that from the matter. But he did say that if there were a defect in the ordination up to that time, you would still regard that as necessary for holy orders. See, so he was clear on all of that. So the Church does have control over the matter and form of sacraments which were only determined in a generic way by Christ. You'll see that in De Sacramentis. Hougon talks about that very clearly. So that's why, but certain things the Church cannot change, and that is the words of consecration and so forth. So that's what that means, is that the Church is bound by anything that is of anything that is set down by Christ as the constitution of the sacrament, you might say. All right. So that's important too, because some people bring up the quote primum, that nobody can ever change it. It doesn't mention any future popes. It just mentions cardinals and various other people that you can't change this. But a pope does not have power against a future pope. It's a general principle. So, he could annul. That's a case with Cum Ex Apostolatus. It was considered a penal law, and all the penal laws were suppressed by the 1917 Code of Canon Law. See, so these are the things that come up in the controversies. So, and the Church might require something in one place and not in another because of heresies. So it might, if there's a heresy that is spread in one area, it might require, like in the Latin Church, that might require something in the form that is not required in another, like in the Eastern Rite, and vice versa. All right. In what pertains to persons, the laws of the Church oblige only in all baptized persons. The subject of this power is those to whom the Savior committed his Church to be ruled. For power is active potency with a certain preeminence. St. Thomas. But we have seen when we treated concerning the hierarchical and monarchical constitution of the Church that active and preeminent power was not given to a multitude nor to a secular principality, but to a sacred principality or hierarchy, which Christ established upon the rock of the Supreme Pontiff. All right, we'll see that a little later, I think. Yes. Errors in the 4th century, Arius, not to be confused with Arius, but Arius, denied the legislative power of the Church with regard to the law of fasting. I guess he liked to eat a lot. The Waldensians completely disregarded this same power. The Waldensians were a heretical group in the 13th century. They eventually reconciled with the church. It was an early form of Protestantism. Second, Luther decreed that by no right can laws be imposed upon Christians, either by men or by angels. So do whatever you want. 3, the school of Marsilius of Padua, who was probably a heretic, but he was certainly a troublemaker, of the Regalists and of the Pistoians, the Jansenists, who at the Synod of Pistoia limited the power of the church to only counseling and preaching, so that with regard to exterior things it possessed no faculty except by the concession of the princes. So that's a form of regalism, meaning the head of the state is also the head of the church. It seems that in general the right and jurisdiction of the church must be denied by non-Catholics inasmuch as they reject the visible constitution of the church and the hierarchy. So obviously, against errors of this type and those connected with them, the doctrine of the church must be examined in this article and in the 3 subsequent articles, which states Jesus Christ gave to his apostles free commands regarding sacred things, together with both the faculty of making laws in the proper sense and a genuine power of judging and punishing, which flows from this. And that's from the encyclical Immortale Dei of Leo XIII. Thesis: Christ gave to the church a legislative power. Argument 1, the church has been directly constituted as a perfect society and kingdom, but the faculty of making laws flows from the nature of a perfect society. So how could you have a society without laws? Proof of the minor: in a society, the actions of the subjects must be directed according to the variety of things, times, and places toward the common good. But this is done through laws, for the law directs the intention by showing what the act must be, which is proportioned to the ultimate end. So the perfect society is not conceived of without a legislative power. You could not have a society unless everyone is ordered to a common end. That's the very definition of a society. And you can't do that without laws, rules. So imagine if you could just shoot whomever you please. Imagine what would go on. Have a fight over a shopping cart. That's true. Some people will do that, or some sort of music is too loud. Or there were no police, because enforcement is key. I mean, you can make all the laws you want, but if you don't enforce them, they're just a dead letter. So imagine making laws and there's no police, no prisons, no judges. Speed limit is 70. People go 150. Who cares? See, but you say, well, can you go over the speed limit? Yes, because toleration is a form of interpretation of the law. In other words, what they tolerate is a form of interpretation of the law. So in Pennsylvania, at least on the turnpike, you can breeze by at 80 miles an hour. They don't look at you. I've done it many times. So Pennsylvania is pretty good, but then in Ohio, you have to watch it a little bit more. And then in Michigan, you push the pedal down right to the floor. Pretty much. It's so funny when you cross that Ohio line. It's just like like the gun for taking off at the Indianapolis 500. Everyone just moves, right as soon as you cross the Michigan line. It's very funny. You're not going to get a ticket. But the thing is that road is so crowded that you can't do much over Well, I think I got it up to 90 a few weeks ago, but because everybody's going so fast. If you went 80, you're in the slow. You're going slow. So I noticed my speedometer. I thought, oh, maybe I should slow down, but so interpretation is part of interpretation is what is tolerated. It's the application of the law. See, so it's in that sense, you don't have to hit it at 70. If you go 70, you're just going. You'd actually be a danger on the road if you go too slow. And I know somebody who got a ticket for going too slow. If you go too slow on a road that's high speed, you are a danger to other people. So, anyway, here's the argument from the words of Christ. Christ said to his apostles, "Amen, I say to you, whatsoever you shall bind upon earth shall be bound also in heaven, and whatsoever you shall loose upon earth shall be loosed also in heaven." But by these words, the power of the church is designated, proof of the minor. From the obvious sense, for to loose and to bind signifies supreme power, especially because of the word quecumque, the added word quecumque, whatsoever, and of the metaphor keys with which these words are connected in Matthew 16:19. All right. So it indicates power. From the context in the verse immediately preceding, he is speaking about the sins of the faithful to be judged in the external forum by the church with authority. Tell the church, if, however, he will not hear the church, tell him to be to thee as a heathen and a publican. See, so there is an authority, a judicial authority in the church. And legislative as well. There is, however, a certain connection between judicial power and legislative power. See, because again, the law has to be applied. That's why you have judges, to apply the law. The function of feeding to the church, John 21 and 1 Peter 5, and to the church it is commanded, "Going therefore, teach ye all nations, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you." But the church cannot feed the faithful, nor can it teach all nations to observe, unless it makes laws for the purpose of directing men in the various circumstances of times and affairs. And also that pascere in Latin doesn't mean simply to put the food out. It means to take care of. That's the feed my lambs, feed my sheep. That means be the shepherd of the flock. That's the sense of it in Latin. It doesn't mean just here's the trough and just, it has a sense of government. The same thing is conferred from actually the original is in Greek. The same thing is confirmed from the fact that power of this type existed in the Old Testament, as it is written, the scribes and the Pharisees have sitten on, that's an old English word, have sitten on the chair of Moses. All things, therefore, whatsoever they shall say to you, observe and do. So our Lord is upholding the legislative power of the Old Testament, and the hierarchy, you might say, of the Old Testament. Argument 3, from the practice of the church which comes down from the apostles. The apostles commanded in the Council of Jerusalem that they abstain from the animals sacrificed to the idols, and from blood, and from suffocated animals. St. Paul gives a command to the Corinthians concerning secular judgments, concerning the fact that women praying had to have their heads covered, and concerning the conditions required in choosing a widow, concerning the judgment of accused priests, etc. So he sets down laws. All of these things pertain, however, to exterior matters. Ergo, since the church now has the same power of establishing and abolishing which it then had, The power of making laws belongs to the church. So that's St. Thomas. That laws were made by the successors of the apostles is testified to by the acts of the councils and the collections of canon law. Hence there is the proposition which is branded heretical by Pius VI. It is an abuse of the authority of the church that it use its power received from God, which the apostles themselves used in establishing and sanctioning exterior discipline. That's heretical. As a matter of fact, there was that Novus Ordo priest that came to us a number of months ago, maybe a year ago. And I was objecting to him all the new mass, new sacraments, and all that. And he was saying, oh, it's an abuse of power, an abuse of power, an abuse of power. See, in establishing and sanctioning exterior discipline. So you can't say that the church has the right to establish exterior discipline, even in the sacraments. And so you can't call that an abuse of authority. If there's something wrong with it, then there's something wrong upstairs. See, but they don't want to look at that. I wish I had had that. Anyway. Objections. Objection 1, whatever pertains to the spiritual, we'll take a break now. Take a break. Was that a Nova? Did I say Novus Ordo? Was it SSBX?
Yes. Yes, you did say.
Did I say Novus Ordo? I don't want to sully his name anymore.
I thought maybe it was that Father Weiss. He was Novus Ordo.
I can't remember now. Nice. There were 2 SSPX priests that came to see us. I can't remember. One was Father Weber, and the other one was Father Feeney.
Father Feeney.
Yes. They look in the window, but they don't buy.
Always searching, never finding.
No, they're content in their own world. Archbishop Lefebvre is the prophet, and we don't have to think about anything else.
Was that the priest that came to see you and you really fell off of your chair?
Yes, that was Father Weber. I don't want to. That was the end of the conversation, and I didn't know where to go from there. I mean, because the office of prophecy has been taken over by the magisterium of the Catholic Church. So there's no more prophecy, and that's very basic. You learn that, and he would say that, and that he was appointed by God to be the prophet. And where does he get that appointment? Does it have an apparition? I mean, but that's not the way the Catholic Church works. Where people have, anyone can say, "I've been appointed by God to it," like Muhammad.
That sounds oddly Protestant.
Oh, oddly, thoroughly. No, but that's it. And that's Father Panic. Says that's all. And then you can't get them to think because the prophet says like the Muslims,
Right.
You can't get them to move, with certain objections. And it's just the prophet. It's the prophet.
Why do we